Hello, true duelists. It's YGO Strat's Yu-Gi-Oh! Single Card History, where I'm going to be talking about some of the cards that have impacted Yu-Gi-Oh! Throughout the years, and some of the other ones that didn't. Today's card, the little floodgate that shows up and ruins games ever since 2014 through to today, it's Shaddoll Winda. Winda was first released in the game warping set that was Duelist Alliance in the year 2014 as an ultra rare, and it got an ultra rare reprint in the 2015 Megatins, and the last full year with Harambe. 2015. It got a secret rare print in 2018's Shadows in Valhalla, and a super rare printing in 2020's Shaddoll Showdown Structure Deck, and a very fancy new alternate art to boot. As of this video, it has spent no time on the ban list, although that is not for a lack of people wanting it there. A level 5 Dark Attribute Spellcaster type fusion monster with 2200 attack and 800 defense. The materials to fusion summon it are any one Shaddoll monster and any one Dark Attribute monster, and its effect reads: must first be fusion summoned, cannot be destroyed by an opponent's card effects. Each player can only special summon monsters once per turn while this card is face up on the field. If this card is sent to the graveyard, you can target one Shaddoll spell or trap in your graveyard, add it to your hand. The weirdest part about this card is the immunity to destruction from the opponent. Like, why is that there? Why does the floodgate need self-protection? I remember learning that the very hard way when playing against Shaddoll as a Mermail player after discarding heavy infantry to activate Abyss Pike, and then being deeply annoyed by the stated power creep back in 2014. And that's because in 2014, and especially early after the release of Duelist Alliance in August of that year, Shaddoll was a tier 1 contender in the metagame. Everyone looking to be good at Yu-Gi-Oh! From locals to premier events was playing with or against Shaddolls, pretty much constantly. The deck had a strength other fusion decks before it lacked, namely in the form of its fusion spell Shaddoll Fusion. Finally, a fusion deck had come along that could send the materials to fusion right from the deck, and the materials sent would always include at least one bonus effect since they were sending Shaddoll monsters, and Shaddoll monsters all have effects if they're sent to the graveyard by card effect. Often players like to summon Shaddoll Construct, who just needed any Shaddoll monster and any light monster, offering ample chaos strategies as well as any playable light monster or engine a place in the metagame. But while Construct offered the Shaddoll player strength on their own turn, Winda offered strength on the opponent's. Making Winda when going first was not uncommon, and it definitely had its benefits. The most obvious is the floodgate effect. If the opponent can only special summon one monster on their turn, and they need to special summon twice to say get an Xyz monster or a Synchro to otherwise out Winda, it can lead to a very commanding position. That, coupled with its immunity to things like Dark Hole and other sorts of effects to destroy it, could easily make it a very annoying card to face. But beyond the obvious floodgate applications, Winda was also the easiest to make if you were going first due to the fusion requirements. Any Shaddoll and any Dark monster means in practical terms any two Shaddolls, which ultimately meant you could get the most of their various effects to set up your turn. Depending on the hand, you could get an additional draw off a copy of Beast, a search through the effect of Hedgehog, a free Falco on board to help set up a Synchro play, or any other sort of recursion from your graveyard, or any one of those effects of your choice if you happen to use Squamata. This was hardly uncommon to open multiple dolls at the time, and being able to make a fusion turn 1 with your names is always key. It also had the lovely benefit of being a level 5 spellcaster, which when paired with Shaddoll's level 2 tuner could make Arcanite Magician. This was a level 7 synchro that needed spellcasters and could pop 2 cards on the field, on top of also being a light monster to help make construct plays after you've used their effect. But the most important part of this play isn't just the disruption and the materials, it's the fact that doing so could get your own Winda off the field to let you special summon as often as you'd like, which is of course important to do when the deck commonly played boss monsters like Blackluster Soldier or Dad or anything else with big beefy stat lines. Winda's strength was only made better with the release of Shaddoll Fusion, which was simply a quick play spell with Shaddoll in its name. Not only could this allow you to keep your Shaddoll Fusion to get out Construct, but it also gave the deck another named spell to either search off of Hedgehog or recover from the grave. Since it doesn't matter how Winda ends up in the graveyard, it can recover any Shaddoll spell or trap to hand when it does so, be it used as synchro material for Arcanite Magician or Black Rose Dragon, or when used as fusion material, or simply when tributed over for a set Shaddoll Beast in the mirror match to make sure the opponent can't get the most out of their Shaddoll fusion. Shaddoll was a staple of the Duelist Alliance formats right from the release of August 2014 through to the November 2015 ban list when Konami went sicko mode on the format. And throughout each of these formats, the deck would evolve, adapting to the meta of the time with the release of things like Cleafort, the rise of Burning Abyss, and of course the release of Nekroz and Secret Forces in early 2015. Much like Shaddoll's strength itself varied throughout the Duelist Alliance formats, the Winda's Winda's did as well, with it kinda depending on the matchup. Something like Cleafort made Winda all but useless, and against Necroz, if they could get out Unicorn with their one special summon, your Winda wasn't doing much of anything. But against something like BA, it was always very solid, and other more rogue-tiered decks of the format, such as Tellarknight or Ritual Beast, could often struggle against Winda as well. But as mentioned, November 2015 would come, and with it, Duelist Alliance would go. Banning Construct took away Shaddoll's biggest power play, and the limit of El Shaddoll Fusion took away not only the deck's easy Winda on the opponent's turn, but also OTK potential in the deck's own battle phase. After that, Shaddoll as a deck fell off pretty quickly. 2015 was the last time it was really considered a deck all on its own, and from then on it's always just been an engine in other decks, or at the very least for the next 5 years this would be the case. Shortly enough after this, Shaddoll ended up finding a home in plenty of Grass decks. Grass was a card that could mill the names by card effect to trigger their grave effects, and when looking for solid engines to slot in to get to 60, it doesn't really hurt to throw in some free draws, some free general advantage from Shaddoll main deck monsters, and a floodgate to boot. This was most common in Lightsworn decks back in 2017 or so, but the Shaddoll engine wasn't uncommon as a side deck play either in something like, say, Infernoid. Regardless of the deck it was in, it was played with the same intention. Abuse Winda and get one extra layer on your board when going first, or possibly cheat out a free fusion monster when going second, such as Grista in Infernoid decks, because Shaddoll Fusion is indeed a card. Dino Dolls was another deck that would come into play in 2018 for people who didn't want to play the standard 2018 Yu-Gi-Oh! This wasn't generally seen as the best deck by any stretch, but it was a pretty damn fun one, and an affordable one to boot. Dolls as a deck don't use the normal summon, which keeps it open for something like Oviraptor, and between Oviraptor being a dark and baby dinosaurs being Earth, the deck could use the second and third best Shaddoll Fusion monsters with ease, and a deck having access to Winda to stun the play of Link format was solid enough going first, and dinos have little trouble OTKing when going second. The next time Winda reared its head would probably be in my least favorite way ever, not that I often like seeing Winda, but because it was a bonus play when going first in Orcust sometime in 2019. The infamous 2-name full combo deck would go on and add Winda to their extra deck, purely to summon it off a copy of Instant Fusion. That's right, Winda's level 5, and that's important again for being an Instant Fusion target. And while Winda only protects itself from the destruction effects of the opponent, Dingirsu does not. This meant that if Orcust players opened Instant Fusion, they could make all their standard plays when going first, but keep Dingirsu on their board with a material, and at the end of all their plays, activate Instant Fusion, cheat out the Winda, and when Instant Fusion would try to resolve in the end phase and destroy it, you could instead detach a material from Dingirsu so that Winda would remain on the field. So on top of all the usual Orcust shenanigans, you also got to face the green-haired fuck that is Winda as well. This is what we in the business call a slightly less than fun time. This was a common thing in Orcust decks up until they eventually fell off in the January 2020 ban list when Konami once again nuked the format. Kind of funny that that's come up twice now. But with the end of TOS format and TOS players' despair, came some Duelist Alliance players' rejoice. And I mean, I'm talking straight injecting copium into the veins. Because the Shaddoll Showdown Structure deck would release just a month later in February of 2020. This would usher in a new staple for quite some time, with the deck's release also accompanying the return of Construct and the rise of Fusion deck as a whole. At long last, Shaddoll were back at full strength, and with some new toys in Wendy, who could summon dolls from the deck when sent to the grave by card effect, Ariel, who offered some grave disruption, and best of all, Apgalone was a new fusion monster that could add any Shaddoll card from deck to hand if it was sent to the grave. This coupled beautifully with the Dogmatica engine that could send Apgalone to the grave to activate Nadir's Servant, effectively making their Rhoda search 2 cards. Not only the deck's own Spell and Trap Searcher in Ecclesia, but also the new trap card Shaddoll Schism. This was a trap that let you fusion summon on the opponent's turn by banishing the materials from your graveyard, allowing you to reuse materials you've already used, on top of offering the standard Winda on the opponent's turn that El Shaddoll Fusion had provided prior. It could also serve as some further removal depending on the exact attribute that you summoned and what the opponent had, which is a nice bit of icing on the cake. This Nadir play to search Schism to get out Winda was the bread and butter play for a number of players, allowing Shaddoll to floodgate on the opponent's turn and get the most of their plays when going first, especially when coupled with things like the Invoked engine, as it so commonly was. Invoked Dogmatica Dolls, as it was known, ran a very small Shaddoll engine, but of course course, Winda was still a very key piece of it. As this deck evolved with the release of new fusion monsters, it would stay popular from 2020 through to 2022 broadly, with players opting to add in things like a Dragoon engine, a DPE engine, branded engines, or you name it. It wasn't the best deck for long, but it has had a habit of popping up anytime there's a big meta shift. When the new format is still being settled, you'll often see a variant of this deck topping tournaments due to its consistency and reliability, and the simple fact that Shaddoll Fusion remains a great card even a decade after its release. In Yu-Gi-Oh!, extra deck monsters are very common. Winda's latest home as I make this video, however, has been in tier limit decks. Who could have seen this coming? A fusion monster was played in a fusion deck. I know, yes, the best deck to come from Power of the Elements, and that really is saying something. Tier limit quickly became a top contender in the meta, and ultimately the meta itself in due time, but from jump, Winda was not an uncommon card to include in the deck. Since tiers can fusion summon from damn near anywhere if they're sent to the grave by card effect, it was almost encouraged to tech in a spare Shaddoll monster to help enable access to Winda. Most commonly, you'd play Shaddoll Beast due to it offering an additional draw when sent to the grave for a fusion summon or by mill, and the fact that its draws triggered the same way that tiers fusion effects did. The tier monsters, mostly being dark, enabled any of them with Beast to become Winda, and when coupled with a monster like Havness, it was very easy and doable to summon Winda on the opponent's turn, sometimes even when they're going first. That was far from common, but it was possible if you opened up or milled a copy of Beast, and for some, easy access to Winda on the opponent's first turn was a bit too good to pass up. This even continued into tier Shizu format broadly, which while not the most common, it was still a play some players opted to make, since you don't get endless summons from the endless mills if Winda is on the board. This could be stopped pretty reliably, however, with something like Kelbeck depending on the opening hand, which I believe is what kept it from being too prominent, on top of needing to see Beast in order to get it to resolve. But it did top, so if nothing else, at least one person out there made their opponent suffer. Regardless, even after the end of tier Shizu format, Winda remains a common tech in tier limit decks. Slot Machine as a deck is as popular as it was competitive, and tier limit went back to being a tiered threat following the ban of Arise Heart in September of 2023. As such, that same strategy of teching in a Shaddoll Beast showed up from time to time, because an extra draw off of a mill is never a bad thing, and if you drew Beast, getting Winda wasn't the end of the world in most cases. It's a pretty fair trade-off for opening a quote-unquote brick. Which brings us to today, as I'm making this video. Overall, Winda has been nothing but a nuisance from day one, but a pretty damn playable one. A floodgate on legs tends to be troublesome, and ones that are easily accessed through the extra deck are even worse to deal with. The advent of summoning this card as Chainlink 2 or higher, so as to not only floodgate the opponent, but floodgate them in a way that they've already wasted their one special summon to really not let them play at all, has made it very prominent in the mind of players. It's also incredibly generic, with Dark being not only like the most abundant and abusable attribute in the game, but also one with the most fusion decks to it, like Branded, Frightfur, Predaplant, Tearlament. All these fusion decks just have an abundance of Darks, so adding a single Shaddoll monster can mean any of them get access to an easy floodgate, which has led to not only this card's multiple appearances in top decks to date, but it will certainly lead to it being in plenty of other decks moving forward, and that's without even having to hard draw instant fusion like an Orcus player. You can easily argue that this card should be banned, and I won't fully disagree with you, but until that time, Winda gets to hold on to the title of being the most annoying little Shaddoll monster that's in oh so many fusion decks. And so that's our look at Yu-Gi-Oh! Single card history, El Shaddoll Winda. Stay tuned for our next video, and feel free to suggest some cards to review or what type of video you'd like to see. Don't forget to like, and as always, subscribe to YGO Strats to impress your smokin' Italian wife, and so you too can be a true duelist.